So why don't I say a few things before we meditate, and then we'll meditate, and then I'll give more of a Dharma talk. So today's talk is devotion to the truth, the heart of Buddhism. And I have been a Buddhist practitioner since the 1960s. My first meditation teacher was Suzuki Roshi. I was very lucky to be able to meditate with him at Tassajara and at San Francisco Zen Center. I went to India. I did a lot of Vipassana meditation with Goenka, and then back here with Jack Kornfield, Joseph Goldstein. Eventually got into Tibetan practice. And along the way in India, I met Ram Dass's guru, this fellow Nim Karoli Baba, who was Hindu, sort of. He was very informal and didn't really talk to us about Hinduism so much as loving people and loving God, remembering God. And I have, over the years, I've been meditating now since 1967. I won't add that up, but it's a long time, and I'm still this guy. And I've been trying to bring together the clarity and the beauty and the precision of the Buddhist worldview, particularly the Tibetan structure of looking at Hinayana, Mahayana, Vajrayana, and how the relationship with the heart evolves through the yanas. And I've been trying to bring that together with my devotional side. As my practice continues, as I get older and deeper into my practice, it really feels like it's more and more about receiving, being simple and easy, and that it's really a lot about the heart, receiving through the heart. So we will talk about that in some depth after the meditation, but I'm bringing this up before we meditate because the first thing I'm going to say when we begin the meditation, most of it will be silent, but I'd like to say just a few sentences at the beginning, and I'm going to say, please invoke that which you trust. In Hinayana, that's Buddha, Dharma, Sangha. In Vajrayana, you may have a lineage master. You may have a deity that you're really attracted to. In Mahayana practice, certainly we cultivate compassion as a heart quality. And I have found that I really struggled for many decades trying to integrate my remarkable meditation practices during retreats into my daily life, and I was really pretty unsuccessful. My teachers were very complimentary. You're a great meditator, and I'd have these wonderful experiences during a retreat. The retreat would be over, and 2 days later, I would be as neurotic, 99.9% as neurotic as before the retreat, which was very frustrating. In fact, my friends said to me that they liked me least after a retreat and best when I was sick because it kind of cut through my spiritual pride or whatever it was I had going on in those days. So I just like to invite us all together today when we begin the practice to not just dive into watching your breath or watching your sensations or whatever it is, but begin to explore, what do you have faith in? What are you willing to receive? We live in very, very unsettled times. And I live in Fairfax, California. Just a week ago, 4 teenage girls burned up in a car. Maybe some of you saw that news. And some of them were friends of a friend of mine. What's going on with the climate? What's going on politically? What's going on in so many ways now? Things are really unsettled. And many people come to me and say, what's going on in the world, what's going on in my life is overwhelming my practice. So to me, trying to watch my breath when Donald Trump is doing what he's doing, I don't care that much about my breath, to be honest with you. I want to find some connection with something greater than all of this. And I fully understand that becoming more mindful, calming down is at least one of the beginning stages of practice. But my sense of it is that everybody in this room has been practicing for a while. Everybody in this room has been doing heart practice. Everybody in this room has been probably doing different kinds of practices, trying to figure out what it is that I can do to be a force for compassion in this very crazy world in which we're living. So the Buddha said that the awakening of faith or devotion is the dawn of realization, like a great light rising and shining within the heart. The Buddha himself, who's not usually thought of as Mr. Devotion, says that devotion to the path, devotion to the truth, devotion to the Guru, devotion to awareness itself is really, in a way, the secret sauce. That with that devotion, then, we can begin to bring a more embodied, heart-centered mindfulness and practice into the world. And I hope we can have a very open and honest discussion about that after I give a little talk after the meditation. But really, let me start that sentence over. I run something called the Living Dying Project, where we offer spiritual support, whatever that might mean, to people who are dying, people who are grieving, people who are caregiving. And I'm really not that interested in dying. I'm interested in awakening. Being around death keeps reminding me that this moment is precious, that being with you is very precious. In Tibetan Buddhism, there are what are called the four mind-turning truths that turn our mind toward the Dharma. And the first of them is, you're going to die, but you don't know when. It is truly possible that one of us, or all of us, don't survive the meditation. It's pretty unlikely, but you don't really know. And if we didn't know that we were ever going to see each other again, or even survive today, how would it affect the way we were willing to be vulnerable, loving, connected, honest with ourselves and each other right now? So I know it sounds kind of like a New Age pep talk here, a New Age fire and brimstone sermon, if you will, but the world needs people now who have some foundation in compassion, who can look at what's going on in the world and not get lost in reactivity, in being able to rest in your practice and respond with the strength and the compassion and the wisdom that deep practice can allow. I have friends who are very angry, very frightened, people who practiced for a really long time. They call up or they email and they say, what did Trump do today? And okay, so why don't we do a guided meditation? Please begin by invoking reaching out, being willing to receive the blessing from that which you trust. Buddha, Dharma, Sangha, that which does not change, that which does not die, that which is your own true nature. Having the faith to go beyond using practice as self-improvement, but a willingness to surrender into each moment fully. And when you notice you're lost in automatic thinking, and you bring your attention back to the primary object of awareness, can you do that with compassion? That very simple moment in which we notice we're lost is the birth of compassion. Can we come back to being present with mercy? As mindfulness begins to deepen and we have a more clear relationship with content, can you begin to pay attention to your relationship with the content rather than just the content itself? Is it a loving, spacious relationship? Are you connected to self, to what you're experiencing? Surrendering into this sense of spaciousness, allowing events to arise and pass away in the vast spaciousness of the heart-mind, sky-like nature of mind. Trusting this letting go into spaciousness. Letting go of identification with perceptions, thoughts, emotions, not I am hearing, but simply hearing is happening. Not my thoughts, but simply thoughts are arising. Letting them come, letting them go, without grasping. letting go of identification with the observer, no one really meditating. Letting go even of identifying with any fear that arises when we let go of being the observer. Fear coming from a need for the illusory self to survive. Let go of the fear, let go of even the need to survive. Trusting that which you invoked. Trusting this spaciousness as the expression of devotion to that which you invoked. From this arises compassion, naturally arising compassion for all beings. Without effort. Just the slightest effort and practice to surrender back into spaciousness. Boundless heart. realizing that that which you invoked is none other than your own true nature. Practicing from a sense of abundance and fullness rather than need and inadequacy. Nothing to be accomplished, nothing to understand. May all beings be free from suffering and from the causes of suffering. Without devotion, the path can be very lonely. Devotion brings juice to our practice. And yet devotion has very different qualities at different stages of the path. And I'd like to talk a bit about that right now. And please feel free to just jump in. We don't have to wait for Q&A if you have some question when I'm talking or remark or something, that's fine. This can be as informal as we like. So in the first stage of Buddhist practice, Hinayana Theravada Buddhism, is anybody not familiar with these terms? It's okay if you're not. Okay, so there are basically three turnings of the wheel of Buddhism. There's Hinayana, the original teaching of Buddhism in India and what used to be called Ceylon, now Sri Lanka, and Burma, Thailand. And then Buddhism moved east, Mahayana Buddhism, China, Japan, Korea, and then it moved back west again, hopped over the Himalayas into Tibet, Vajrayana Buddhism. Hinayana means lesser vehicle, which people in that school don't like that name so much because the next one is the greater vehicle, and they feel really put upon. I tried to teach a workshop at Spirit Rock once about the three annas, and they would not let me do it. Anyway, so the idea is that Hinayana, lesser vehicle, but they like to be called Theravada, means the old school, the original teaching. Hinayana is a vehicle big enough to get only you across the ocean of suffering. Whereas Mahayana, they bring in the notion of compassion. It's a great vehicle. You're practicing for all beings. You're practicing for your children. You're practicing for your neighbor. You're practicing for everybody, really. And for me, having that motivation deeply inspires practice. That if I'm just sitting there, I need to get enlightened. And that's the way almost all of us start, right? You're suffering, you want to suffer less. Let's sit down and look at that, and let's work hard and try to find how this suffering is being created. And that is the Theravada Hinayana path. And in Vajrayana Buddhism, Tibetan Buddhism, it brings in notions of relative deity, absolute deity, devotion in a very different sense. So that Hinayana Buddhism, we focus on the content of experience. How are we causing suffering in the way that we deal with the content of our experience? In Mahayana Buddhism, which I tried to kind of point out during the meditation, we get more interested in our relationship with the experience. Is it a loving relationship? Is it a compassionate relationship? Not just what am I feeling, what am I hearing, what am I seeing, but what is my relationship with it? And in Vajrayana Buddhism, we're really looking at what is the nature of experience itself. Who is it that's having these experiences? So that suppose you're somebody that says a mantra, which I do, maybe you do too, apparently. And from Hinayana practice, Theravada practice, the core teaching of Theravada practice is taking refuge, reaching out and trusting Buddha, Dharma, Sangha, that we're invoking something that we trust, Buddha, Dharma, Sangha. Everybody knows what Buddha, Dharma, Sangha is, right? This is the Dharma collective, so that's as safe as ocean there. And so we're kind of feeling inadequate. My life is kind of a mess. I'm going to come to the Buddha, Dharma, Sangha, follow these teachings, try to pay attention, and in doing that, begin to alleviate suffering, right? And there is pretty much a sense of inadequacy in practice for a long time for many people, certainly for me. I don't know about you, but I came to practice because I was tired of suffering so much. I wanted to be happier. Simple as that. I didn't care about anything else. Let me out of this prison. How can I fix this, right? I was the stuttering statistician from Stanford. That was kind of my nickname for myself, if you will. And eventually then in Mahayana practice, there's now a relationship. There's this loving relationship with the beloved. If we're talking about a deity or a guru or something, we still put it up there. I'm down here, you're up there. But at the same time, we're beginning to realize that we're lovable, that there's something to be received, that we're not trying to get away from all the difficult stuff so much, but that we can have a loving, compassionate relationship with what it is that's going on. So now when you're saying your mantra, instead of saying, please, so suppose your mantra is Om Mani Padme Hum. It's a mantra to Chinrezi, the God of compassion. And from the Theravada perspective, when you're saying this, you're asking Chinrezi to show up. You don't feel particularly worthy, but you're trying hard and you're saying, here I am, I'm trying, please start opening up to me. But in Mahayana level of practice, Now devotion is such that we're really beginning to feel that there's a connection here. That I love Chinrezi loves me, or Tara, or Christ, or whoever it is. There is this sense of this very juicy relationship with the beloved. But in Vajrayana practice, which is only really traditionally taught after you've done really a lot of mindfulness practice and really a lot of compassion practice and devotion practice, then in Vajrayana practice, you go in and see the Lama, and he or she bops you on the head with a box of magic treasures and gives you a mantra and a visualization, and you become the deity. The mantra becomes the deity. So that in the first stage, we're asking the deity to show up. In the second stage, we're in a loving relationship with the deity that's outside and this great being. But in this third stage, you are the deity. When I say Om Mani Padme Hum, Om Mani Padme Hum, Om Mani Padme Hum, when I say that, not only am I the deity, but the sound of the mantra is the full expression of the deity. Each time I'm saying the mantra is completely manifesting God or Buddha nature, whatever you want to call that. A friend of mine came up with this line, God is the worst nickname ever, which I get a big kick out of, because in Buddhism we don't talk about God, but it's the same whether we talk about true nature or pure awareness or consciousness itself or God, same stuff. Okay, so we go through these stages, and interestingly enough, if we go back to the chakras or stages of early childhood development, there are very interesting and useful parallels between these psychological teachings, these bodily energetic teachings, the Buddhist Dharma teachings, and that we're really going through and healing what we didn't fully unfold in our childhood in a certain way. And that people's relationship with the Dharma, with religion, with spirit, is pretty much parallel in some ways to their level of psychological integration. So that if you still have a lot of mommy and daddy issues, you'll probably approach the teaching that, hey, I need a group, a teacher to depend on, right? And that then you get to the Mahayana stage, and your devotion is such that you feel full enough, rich enough to be in that relationship, that you're having a very different relationship with the deity. Okay, before I plunge on, are there any comments about what I've said so far? The magic talking stick.
Magic talking stick. Thank you so much for that lead. In the Buddha teachings, some of the teachings, they're the levels in the cosmology of Buddhism. They're the levels of the gods. Yes,
The deities, yeah.
but even the gods came to the Buddha because the gods suffered also. So to put myself in a position of, so the Buddha doesn't point outward for me, the Buddha doesn't point outward, the Buddha points inward. The practice is to turn inward, but you suggest a turning outward to a deity. So I'm curious about that.
Right.
Yes, so because, I got some magic beans to sell you too.
I'm sorry, you got the magic beans?
Yeah, because people like magic beans, it's easy to sell magic beans for people who believe in magic beans. But I don't find this in my practice in my study of Buddhism.
So what kind of practice do you do?
Mahayana practice.
Mahayana practice.
Yes.
Okay.
And in the tools of the Buddha, they're simple tools, that there's the suffering, There's the origins of suffering. There's the release of suffering and the Eightfold Noble Path. And to me, that's simple. So I'm curious to hear more. Thank you.
Okay. So I wasn't really aware that the gods suffered. That's that's news to me, but I guess that's certainly possible. As I was saying, initially we do see the deity as something out there greater than us, that we're inadequate. We're trying to invoke, please show up, please help me. At the Mahayana level, devotion and compassion are brought in. Devotion is a much easier practice than compassion practice, because devotion is loving that which is easiest to love, and compassion is loving that which is hardest to love, right? Who would like to define compassion?
Can you just say love meets suffering?
There you go, love meets suffering. Okay, so compassion is exactly the same thing as loving kindness, except in the context of suffering, right? So that for many people, learning to love the deity, some ideal, whether it's Buddha, Dharma, Sangha, whether it's Shinrei-zi, whether it's your own true nature, learning to love that because you see it as so lovable, it is love itself, then opens the heart enough that we can begin to trust that we can feel compassion for our suffering and for the suffering of others. Traditionally, Buddhism teaches compassion as compassion for others, because it's kind of assumed that if you're a practitioner, you have compassion for yourself already. That is not necessarily true in the West. And we have to have compassion for ourselves. So the Dalai Lama on his third visit to America said, "Now I'm beginning to understand that it makes me very sad. You Americans don't like yourselves." So a lot of these Asian teachings were developed by and for people many centuries ago who were walking around barefoot and didn't have an iPhone, didn't have a mortgage. They had a very different set of issues to deal with. They were grounded and centered, which is not necessarily the case here in the West. So I'm kind of deviating from your question, if I might, and I'll get back to it, that I found in my own practice particularly, but in guiding others, that embodied mindfulness is a real missing piece for a lot of people in the West. That becoming grounded, first chakra, antidote to fear, and becoming centered, second chakra, hara, the place from which martial arts are done, the antidote to guilt and shame, is really the foundation then for beginning to open the heart. So many people come to me, they want to die consciously, they want to deepen their meditation practice. Maybe they say the deity's inside or the deity's outside, whatever, but they're bringing in a whole sack over their shoulder of fear, guilt, and shame. And it's very difficult to die well or to die openly if you're really feeling ashamed and guilty and fearful about what it is that's going on in life. So that my own practice, a lot of us going back to the beginning and noticing how those qualities come up in me, and then at the other end, sort of resting in spaciousness. Now, getting back to Noé, how do you pronounce it? Noé's question, which I kind of have forgotten because of all my jabbering, the outside and the inside deity. So there's a wonderful teacher named Ramana Maharshi. You might know of him. And he said the guru is both inside and outside. From the inside, he's pulling you in. From the outside, he's inviting you. And it's both at the same time. It really is just a matter of language or perspective. And he also said that there are basically two paths, and eventually you have to choose one of them. One is the path of self-inquiry, meditation. Who am I? What's going on? Who's the deity? Who's meditating? Who am I? And the other is the path of devotion. One is dying into love, and the other is dying beyond concept, dying into spaciousness. They end up being the same thing, of course, but I find that for many people in the West, that just trying to get to the end by getting quieter and quieter in a very busy life without devotion is a really difficult and at times frustrating practice. So the fact that you feel the deities inside you being called within is wonderful and it's perfect. And then can you begin to see, though, that as I'm sitting across from you, I also am the deity, and the other people in the room are, and Donald Trump is, and et cetera, like that. Now, if everybody in the world could see Donald Trump as the deity, it would be a very different world, obviously. If Donald Trump could see that, it would be a very different world. And obviously, in any one time and point in history, a lot of people are lost in who they think they are. The Buddha said that only 1 out of 1,000 people really gets on the path, and out of 1,000 people on the path, only one gets to the end. That's 1 out of 1,000,000 back in his day. Now, whether that's the odds have gotten better or worse in the time since then, it really remains to be seen. But so trying to get into that question a little more deeply, if I could, that I've been meditating for a really long time, and it's only in the last few years that I'm beginning to really accept that the deity's in me. I read those things, I read books that I read decades ago, and they make a whole sense in a whole different way than they did before. To admit how beautiful I am and how beautiful you are, and be pure enough to not be caught up in that is a tricky business. And there are a lot of people who do get some powers, who do get some wisdom, and they get really lost in the power and the beauty of it. And I'm not saying you're doing that. I don't think you're doing that at all. I'm having a hard time with your question, obviously.
Thank you.
So from a Mahayana perspective, how deeply are we willing to be touched by what is going on in the world? I have an Instagram account, and I got a response this week from a guy who said, I don't really feel I can receive grace because I am so upset by the genocide that's going on in the Middle East. It would seem selfish to me to receive grace when I know that 150,000 people are being killed. And he didn't even say the Middle East. I assume that's what he was referring to. Maybe it was Darfur or something, I don't know. But he was saying that just referring to just being willing to receive grace when so many people were suffering, it was something he couldn't do. And I wrote something back to him, and maybe I didn't get that on my cheat sheet here. I guess I didn't. I put that on there before, okay. Anyway, it's not there, what I wrote to him. But grace is available in each moment. There's a wonderful poem by St. John of the Cross where somebody asks God, what is grace? And God says, everything is grace. And the person looks really perplexed, and God says, well, I can understand how you might be perplexed, but could not every moment in your beloved's arms be grace? Existence is my arms. Existence is my arms. So in this very difficult time in which we're living, can we find the grace in the fact that there is genocide going on, that 4 teenage girls burned up in a SUV a mile from my house, right? And when we get to the tantric, the Vajrayana stage of devotion, there are deities that have very wrathful faces. Mahakala, Shiva, Kali. There are deities that aren't the people you want to go out and have cocktails with. They're the people that they're very concerned about getting too close to, right? But can we allow ourselves to be touched and to touch the suffering that's going on in the genocide in Gaza and the traffic accident near my home, to really feel, or at least to feel what we imagine the parents of those girls are going through, and keep our hearts open. That's what's being asked of us. And without this tantric perspective, I think it's incredibly difficult. That it's a very unfair world in the sense that babies are starving to death, and people are being abused, and people are raping each other. And at the same time, very bad people are accumulating all kinds of power and wealth and pleasures. Okay. So I think it's really crucial to find a practice that we can bring into daily life that is very robust. That suppose you were in a car. Imagine that when you are dying, you are lying on the floor of CVS, and a stranger that you've never met is breathing in your mouth and ripping your shirt off. Imagine that when you're dying, you're in a car with a person that you love the most in the world, and that person is screaming in terror. Imagine that when you're dying, you're in a hospital bed and there's so many opioids in your bloodstream you can't even focus your mind. We don't know what that moment is going to be like. We don't know. So if I were in that car, I don't think I'd be watching my breath. And in fact, I remember when I was in India, I was doing these Goenka retreats, 40-day retreat, and toward the end, I had to go to a bank, and between 2 retreats, I had to go cash some traveler's checks at a bank out in the jungle. It was, call it a bank, was just a shed, and I was sitting there, and another guy from the retreat came into the bank, and I said, "Hey, hi, what are you doing?" And he said, "I'm watching my breath, aren't you?" And no, I wasn't watching my breath. I was watching India. I was so fascinated with how insane and wonderful the place was. But my guess is that if I were in that car, I would remember to say God's name. That I would say a mantra and realize that I was connected. When Gandhi was assassinated, somebody came up to him out of a crowd and pumped a couple of bullets into his chest, and he said, "Ram, Ram, Ram," as he was toppling over. And he was able to do that not because he was shot, but because he was always doing it. Okay, it's 3 o'clock. Other remarks?
This may be something we're going to get to. You just started talking about the mommy-daddy phase of practice, and I'm really interested in your thoughts about the sort of either convergence or divergence of psychological understanding versus the spiritual path.
Right.
One of our main teachers here, Eve Ekman, talks about
Who's the other teacher?
Eve Ekman is one of the major teachers here.
Okay.
She talks about a psycho-spiritual
Right.
path. We're trying to combine the both. And I'm a psychologist, and they just seem really, really different to me. And so I was really intrigued when you started saying, well, there's this
Okay.
phase where you're dealing with your mommy and daddy and stuff. So if that fits with what you were planning on
It
talking
does,
about.
it could, it will. So let's imagine a hypothetical little baby boy, or even pre-baby, there's a fetus. And from halfway through gestation to about 1 year old, this little being is learning to be grounded, to trust that it's safe to be physical. And to the extent that that little creature had abandonment, accident, illness, injury, times when the parents were not really there, he or she learned that it was not necessarily completely safe to be here on this planet. My earliest memory is feeling ecstatic. I was crawling. I really loved being in my body. I found this metal object on the floor. Turned out to be a hairpin. And lo and behold, on the wall in front of me were 2 holes. And lo and behold, the 2 ends of the hairpin fit right in those 2 holes. I thought, how cool is this? I've solved the puzzle. You know, I didn't have any words yet, but obviously that goes in there. And boom, what happened, right? I got the shock of my life. Okay, so we all, and I had very loving parents. Some people didn't have such loving parents. Some people had abusive parents or neglectful parents. Everybody had something, so that we only learned partly to be grounded, to trust the root chakra, the antidote to fear. So when fear arises, very often, almost always, people are not mindful of fear. Almost always when fear arises, we fixate on the trigger, the story. I'm afraid because he's doing that, the climate's doing this, my body feels like this, right? How often have you really experienced what is going on in your energy body? What does it feel like when you're afraid? Letting go of the narrative, completely letting go of the story, and having the immediate, naked, direct experience of fear. The first time that happened to me was shocking. I realized I'd never experienced fear before. As soon as it would arise, I jump into my mind and try to figure out how to get out of it, right? So it takes some training to sit with fear. And even at a very subtle level, I've been at longer retreats where I began to notice my mind would get very, very still, and then thoughts would come. And I'd be aware of the thoughts and they'd dissolve. And my mind would get really still, and then thoughts would come. And I asked, why do the thoughts come? Why don't I just hang out in that stillness? It feels so great. And I noticed that right before I thought was fear. Fear of spaciousness, fear of emptiness, fear of non-being. And that the ego believes Descartes, I think therefore I am, right? If I can do some thinking now, my illusory self will be a little bit more secure, right? That there's fear of emptiness, fear of the true nature of reality, if you will. We're lost in the, Winnicott called it the false self, you know, Winnicott, that he says almost no child gets through childhood without creating a false self to deal with the insults of childhood. Okay, so second trimester to 1 year old, learning to be physical and not get lost in fear. Can you become aware of fear? I have this semi-cute notion I call the tantric 3-step healing process. There's the country 2-step, this is the tantric 3-step. First step of the tantric 3-step is grounded, centered mindfulness. You're in your body, you're feeling what's going on, you're letting go of the narrative. Here's what it feels like to be afraid. Here's what it feels like to be angry. Emotions are healing messages. They're not good or bad. Some of them are much more difficult not to get lost in. Fear is probably the hardest one for everybody. It's the fundamental emotion. Okay. So then from the age of about 6 months old, there's overlap here, and these ages are approximate, to about 2 years old, this little being learns to be centered. Hara, Zen practice, the place in which martial arts are done. And that is the antidote to guilt, guilt about what you're doing. And it's learning to not just be present physically, but to move into the world. You're learning that there is the possibility of not just feeling safe here, but feeling safe here and going there. And clearly, if you don't feel safe here in the first place, it's going to be more challenging to go out and do that thing. Okay, so these are, in my experience, very precise diagnostic tools. When somebody comes in and they're talking about, I want to be free, but they keep apologizing to me because this or that, they're feeling guilty, they're uncentered, they're not down in their body, they're up in their head. So the encouragement to drop down, to inhabit the root chakra, do a grounding meditation. Right now as I'm talking, I'm going to keep talking. Can you, as you breathe out, just breathe out through the base of your torso into the earth. Into the earth that supports and nourishes. And as you breathe in, just receive that energy, slightly emphasizing the exhalation, inhabiting the root chakra, underneath the fear. Dropping down, below the mind, below the fear. You feel how quiet the room gets when we do that. And then centering is the same thing, but dropping down into the lower belly, a few fingers below the navel, a few fingers inside the front of your body. Much of, at least Soto Zen, is based on dropping down into the hara. Is it possible as I'm talking and you're listening? Is it possible in your driving home? Is it possible as you're getting mad at somebody to be centered, right? I was just reading, it's a whole long story, but I was reading this thing by Jordan Peterson, who I'm not a big fan of, but he's an interesting guy. And he was saying, the one quality that helps a relationship survive is being able to fight consciously, right? And if you're not centered, you're going to be overwhelmed by the other person's anger. I won't tell a personal story about what happened to me last night. We'll move on from there. Okay.
You can ask if people online want to talk.
Okay, but I'm not quite, yeah, I will. And we don't have that much time. Okay, so third chakra is about shame, not about guilt about what you're doing, about shame of who you are. Okay, and once one then can inhabit the lower chakras, then there is the support to open the heart. The belly supports the heart. If third chakra is about the beginning of ego development, beyond shame. Okay, so beyond fear, beyond guilt, beyond shame, then you can open the heart. Then we can talk about the deities. Then we can talk about devotion and compassion. How can you even begin to truly practice compassion if you're feeling guilty about who you are, about what you're doing, shame about who you are? You can have a taste of it, certainly, an inspiring taste of it, but you can't live there. You can't rest there. So for many of us, there is this psycho-spiritual process of meditating and running into these roadblocks where your personality structure is guiding your practice. Who is it that says you're doing well or you're not well? Your superego, the inner critic, is judging your practice all the time. And the inner critic was learned at a time when you had no power at all. It's a voice that was interjected when the big people had all the power. So it's saying, you're not a very good meditator. And if you don't meditate better, you're going to die unhappy. And it's like the voice of survival. It's a life and death voice that if you don't pay attention to it, you're going to be fucked. Okay, so to begin to First stage of the Tantric three-step is embodied mindfulness. What does it feel like to be now? What fear, guilt, and shame is arising? Can I feel that, not get lost and try to figure it out, but being willing to be guilty, to be ashamed, to be touched by it. And then the second stage of the Tantric three-step is, can I have compassion for how much I'm suffering in doing this, or how much they're suffering in doing that? And the third stage then of the Tantric three-step is the Tantric realization that even this emotion is a pure expression of the deity. That guilt, fear, and shame are just as much God as happiness, rainbows, and unicorns, or whatever you like. Okay, so that is, the Tantric three-step is a practice that is probably something that takes a whole lifetime, but it's also something you can do in 5 seconds, right? So like right now, if I'm feeling off, can I be grounded and centered? Can I open my heart to this? Oh, this is okay too, right? And it can happen like that. You can just train yourself. Very often people get stuck at a level of practice that's been working. That suppose, for instance, that your mindfulness is deepening, and one can hold on to that practice rather than going into compassion practice because you're attached to that, because it's been working, or your heart has begun to open, and then letting go into the profound spaciousness of Tantra is a kind of a scary thing, but it's the next stage. Okay. I have all these great quotes and things. I'm not using any of them, but that's okay. So here's one brief quote from a poem from Hafiz, and he's talking about tantric devotion. Know the nature of your beloved. In his loving eyes, your every thought, word, and movement is always, always beautiful. In the beginning of practice, we're trying to improve. We don't think we're beautiful. We want to fix ourselves so we can think we're beautiful. In the tantric stage of practice, whatever is, it's all the deity. It's all nature of mind, which then finally brings us to non-duality, to wholeness itself. And in my work with dying people, being able to move into non-duality is crucial because that is what we die into. So to the extent that you in your practice have had some experiences of resting in non-self, then dying will be another moment of that. The Tibetans say that when you die, there will be a light as bright as 1,000 suns. That is a very bright light. And if we have not gotten used to that in our lifetime, how deeply can you die in love? How deeply can you accept that light that is always available in every moment? Maybe you've taken psychedelics, maybe you've had some deep meditative experiences, but in this humble, mundane moment of us hanging around this round rug here and having this conversation, this is as holy as it's ever going to get, right? This is it. Does anybody on the remote want to say anything? I guess that's a no. John, you want to say something? No. Okay, anybody in the room here? Yes, please.
I have a question. So when you do work for or with people whose end of life, what's the process? Do you kind of diagnose or intuitively feel which stage they are, and what is the process you decide which practice you offer in your apothecary?
Right.
Yeah, just curious.
Did everybody hear the question there? Okay, well, it's a difficult question. It obviously completely depends on who that person is. And you have to remember that I see a very highly pre-selected subpopulation of people who are dying. I run the Living Dying Project. So people that come to me, come to the Living Dying Project, they want spiritual support. So whatever that means, some people are Christians, a lot of them are Buddhists, and some people are beginning practice, some people have been meditating for decades. Very often people are coming with fear, guilt, and shame, and they want to die consciously, and we have to do some of the tantric three-step work that I was just mentioning. Very often, I had two consecutive clients, both older women who were dying of cancer. The first one was a very intellectual person. She had a very hard time meditating. She really liked what I was teaching. She came to my groups for a long time, but she self-described herself as a bad meditator, right? And she knew that she was dying. She had very advanced lung cancer. She could barely walk across a room, and felt that she needed to understand non-duality or she wouldn't be able to die well. And she couldn't understand it. And as she was dying, she said, my spiritual life has been a failure. And she actually availed herself of medical aid in dying, which she got the prescription from the doctor. And right after she died, I had a second client who had meditated more than I had, which is saying something. She had done so many long retreats. And then later on in her life, she had really gotten involved in devotional practice, did a lot of devotional chanting. She was a PhD psychologist, a very successful career she had. And with all of her practice, she was afraid of dying. And she came to me and said exactly the same thing the first person had said. My spiritual life has been a failure. And I read her these 3 lines from this Rumi poem, which maybe aren't on this. I always get the wrong stuff. I kind of know it by heart, maybe not. Anyway, so there's this poem by Rumi where somebody is praying to God and God never answers. And the guy's complaining, look, I'm always praying, you never show up. What's going on here? Why aren't you showing up? And God says, the longing you express is the return message. The grief you cry out from is the secret cup. The yearning you feel draws you toward union. And she got it just like that. That she had even after all the practice, she had some notion that I should feel good about all this, that all should be fine. And she still had all these emotions, but that even that was okay. That it's not about what passing them, it's not about the content. It's about the nature of the content. All of the content is expression of pure awareness. So that's one answer to your question. I'll tell one other brief story. I got a phone call. There was a woman dying at an apartment in San Francisco. Would I come and see her? She had very advanced cancer. She wanted to die, and every morning she'd wake up and was very frustrated that she wasn't dead, right? She thought she was done, and her body said, no, not yet, girl. So I come there. They take me into the back room. She's being cared for by her daughter and her closest friend. So I go into the back room with this woman. We talk, and she says, yeah, I really want to die, but I can't die. I'm so frustrated. And we talk, and I'm grounded and centered. And as she's telling me that she wants to die, it doesn't feel right. It's kind of like, if I'm centered enough, it's like a truth detector. Does that make sense? So she said, I want to die. And I kind of explored, well, why do you want to die? What's going on? And she finally admitted that she was so embarrassed to need to be cared for by her daughter and her best friend, she would rather be dead. She had a personality that I'd rather be dead than need to be cared for. So I called in the best friend and the daughter and said, well, how do you feel about taking care of your mother and your friend. They said, it was such a blessing. It's such an honor to do this. We're so happy to do it. She said, really? She didn't want to die anymore. Okay, so her practice was such that she couldn't tell the truth to herself. Fear of death is an incredibly, I'm not at all afraid of the concept of death, but if you held my head underwater long enough, I would be afraid of death. You would be afraid of death, right? So it's good to be able to feel very sensitively what's going on. And when I was talking before about fear being the enemy of the first chakra, guilt the second, shame the third, and they're about being grounded and centered, the quality of the heart chakra is about having appropriate boundaries. And the enemy of the open heart is grief. Grief dares us to love again. We've all loved. Grief and love are sisters. You've loved and people left, people died, people disappointed. It happens to everybody, right? So what does the personality say? Oh, being this open is pretty painful stuff. Let me protect myself, right? You've probably been to a doctor who was not willing to feel your suffering because he or she was not trained to work with human suffering. He or she was trained to work with oncology or whatever the specialty happened to be. So the fundamental answer to your question is, can I be as present as I can be and open up to this other human being and just see what's needed there? And I'm working on my stuff. That you dying is going to resonate my fear of dying. I'm going to be a little afraid because you're pointing at me, you're going to die. In fact, you're dying says I'm going to die, right? And so I really teach caregiving as work on yourself. It's like you're meditating in the context of there's somebody that needs care. And my fear arises, my guilt arises, my shame arises, my grief arises. Can I be a living model that as as I'm here with you, I'm modeling that this situation is workable. It's open to embodied mindfulness, it's open to compassion, it's open to a tantric understanding of what's going on in life. Finally, a good answer. Oh, good. A good one. So Suzuki Roshi, my first teacher, I'd just like to give you a couple of his quotes. One of them is, enlightenment has been the biggest disappointment of my life. Because you expect you're going to be happy all the time. Your body's going, no, it's the same stuff. You just have a different relationship with it. And the other thing he said to his students, you're all perfect, but there's still some room for improvement, which is another very good one to remember. Did somebody else want to say something, please? Yeah, please.
You were talking earlier about the stages of human development and how, as I heard it, that if these things like fear, guilt, and shame are not resolved, that's basically going to impede a person's ability to know that they are the divine. Did I get that part right before I ask any more?
Ramdas had us saying, if you're son of a bitch and get enlightened, you'll be an enlightened son of a bitch. So one can have a sudden breakthrough where you haven't worked through all your stuff. But for most people, it helps to have done some basic body and fender psycho-spiritual work. It's harder to trust the heart if you haven't gone through these stages that I'm talking about. It's not always imperative, but for most people who are on a gradual path to awakening, it is incredibly helpful, yes.
Okay, so let's go with that with the most people,
like you.
like me. So having said that, and I know that there's no one prescription for everyone, but you kind of talked about, you know, I think you were talking about first starting with mindfulness.
Embodied
and
mindfulness.
embodied mindfulness. So like if to kind of simplify it for me, if you can, the sort of the steps that you would recommend a person go through if they're still working on those things, that might impede me from having an open heart, or might make it frightening for me to let go of personality in order to experience spaciousness, for example.
Okay. Once again, it's almost impossible to give a prescription for a generic person. It's a very individual thing. If you're about to go off the path into the left gutter, I'll say go right, and if you're going to go off the path to the right, I'll say go left, right? So it's kind of contradictory, but certainly one has to look at how lost are you in psychological stuff. Maybe therapy or body work is really useful. I did all that meditating, and only after I got in some kind of somatic therapy and I got this grounding and centering piece, did my practice really bear fruit. I mean, I was able to really focus in and see things, but I wasn't able to embody it. And it was like pouring nectar into a sieve. And that is something that each person has to determine. Almost nobody in the room, I would guess, has a guru who says, now it's time to be a vegetarian, now it's time to get divorced, now it's time to spend 2 years in India. You've got to make those decisions on your own. And the neurotic part of you, the part of you that's trying to protect yourself, is very highly involved in making those decisions, right? So it's useful to be around people a little ahead of you on the path. Thich Nhat Hanh says in this age in which we're living that the Sangha has become the Buddha, right? That it's not this dude, but it's us, right? It's democratized in a certain way. And relationships, how one relates to your close loved ones is very telling in what work you need to do. Ask my partner. So certainly in general, my experience as a meditation teacher is bringing these embodiment practices in, working with some grounding and working some centering is crucial for many people because the Eastern texts don't talk about that. It's assumed when you begin that you are grounded and centered, that you're in your body and you can start letting go. And starting to let go from a place of being ungrounded and uncentered leads to all kinds of dead ends and detours and complications. So get in your body, be able to be with your sensations, then learn to have compassion for yourself. Compassion is the center point of the whole spiritual process. Before compassion, it's personal. After compassion, it's transpersonal. Compassion, the heart is the bridge. And being able to have love for the part of you that's so unhappy, that's so frightened, is crucial. And that needs the foundation of being grounded, being centered for most people. The qualities, the defining qualities of the open heart are a spacious heart, boundless heart, a heart that is boundlessly spacious, a connected heart, connected to yourself, connected to each other, connected to God, connected to the earth, and a warm heart. Is your heart right now, is it warm? Is it connected? If it's not, what can you do about that? So, I guess the core thing I can say is that we need to allow ourselves to be touched. before we can let go of things. That people are trying to let go before they've touched, and it doesn't work. You've got to feel the suffering before you can get beyond it. There's no end run. And the paradox of spiritual practice is leaning into the suffering rather than getting away from it, trusting that which you've invoked, trusting that we are compassion. Compassion starts out as something we cultivate. It has a small c. As we go into it, it's a capital C. It's who we are. It's our true nature. It's one of the three defining qualities of the totally awakened mind is naturally arising compassionate activity, as well as great clarity and great spaciousness. So, I have a website, I have a podcast that goes into this stuff a lot more deeply. We have an hour here to talk about this stuff. I have a group every other Saturday that Michael comes to sometimes. We had it yesterday. Every other Saturday, it's a Zoom group with 1,200 people in it, although almost nobody comes in person. But you can go to the website. There's a lot of great free material there. I have a podcast on Ram Dass's Be Here Now network. So thank you all so much. Obviously there's a lot more here to do, but it's been a real pleasure.